Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Radha Govinda Goswami Dinamini Namaste Jananishtarini. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So reading today from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 16, Text 17. Sorry? Let me go through. Yeah, it's the wrong canto. Thank you, Prabhu. Just check it. Yeah, should be there. So, chapter 16, text 17. Okay. Brahmanyasya param daivam Brahmana kilate prabhu Vipranam deva devanam Bhagavan Atma Daivatam Brahmanasya Param Daivam Brahmanal Kilate Prabhu Vipranam Deva Devanam Bhagavan Atma Daivatam Brahmanyasya param daivam Brahmana kilate prabhu Vipranam deva devanam Bhagavan atma daivatam Brahmanasya param daivam Brahmana kilate prabhu Vipranam deva devanam Bhagavan atma daivatam Brahmanasya param daivam Brahmana kilate prabhu Vipranam deva devanam Bhagavan Atma Daivatam Brahmanasya Param Daivam Brahmana Kilate Prabhu Vipranam Deva Devanam Bhagavan Atma Daivatam Brahmanyasya param daivam Brahmana kilate prabhu Vipranam deva devanam Bhagavan atma daivatam Manasya param daivam Brahmana kilate prabhu Vipranam deva devanam Bhagavan atma daivatam Brahmanasya, of the Supreme Director of the Brahminical culture. Param, the highest. Daivam, position. Brahmana, the Brahmanas. Kila, for the teaching of others. Te, your, Prabhu, O Lord, Vipranam, of the Brahmanas, Deva Devanam, to be worshipped by the demigods. Bhagavan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Atma, the Self. Daivatam, a worshipable deity. Translation. O Lord, you are the Supreme Director of the Brahminical culture. Your considering the Brahmanas to be in the highest position is your example for teaching others. Actually, you are the Supreme Worshipable Deity, not only for the gods, but for the Brahmanas also. Purport. In the Brahma Samhita, it is clearly stated that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the cause of all causes. There are undoubtedly many demigods, the chiefs of whom are Brahma and Shiva. Lord Vishnu is the Lord of Brahma and Shiva, not to speak of the Brahmanas in this material world. As mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, the Supreme Lord is very, very favorable towards all activities performed according to Brahminical culture, or the qualities of control of the senses and mind, cleanliness, forbearance, faith in scripture, and practical and theoretical knowledge. The Lord is the supersoul of everyone. In Bhagavad Gita, it is said that the Lord is the source of all emanations. Thus, he is also the source of Brahma and Shiva. And again, the translation. O Lord, you are the Supreme Director of the Brahminical culture. Your considering the Brahmanas to be in the highest position is your example for teaching others. Actually, you are the Supreme Worshipable Deity, not only for the gods, but for the Brahmanas also. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupah Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatha Tanvitam tam sajivam sadvaitam savadhutam parijana sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gora Tvishe Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So we are continuing our reading through Srimad Bhagavatam, and as we know, this is a very, very famous section. And we've just now come to the interesting glorification of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And this is an interesting one because it is very confusing. And we find here the four Kumaras, the sages, they were very, not the four Kumaras, the four Kumaras, they were rather confused, right? They weren't sure what was about to happen. The Lord had just spoken in very conflicting ways, they felt, right? Of course, now they've moved in their position, at least in terms of this pastime. They've gone deeper into it. And having had expressed their confusion was about which direction the Lord is going to take things in. Either he is speaking the words he's speaking in some sort of glorification, and he's speaking in humility in order to glorify them. Or rather, he is speaking some other terms in which he is planning to establish his intense chastisement of them. So either they are to be blessed or they are to be chastised by the words of the Lord. At least this is the way Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he interprets this section, right? So when they're speaking out of a sense of confusion. They're speaking out of a sense of wishing to understand the Lord further. They also, now having reached a different position than they were before, they also now were very eager to continue hearing the words of the Lord. This is also described. And therefore they are embodying a very devotional attitude, in the sense that they wish to hear more and more from the Lord. And what do we hear? They are glorifying the Lord. They're saying that you are the supreme director of the Brahminical culture. Your considering the Brahmanas to be in the highest position is your example for teaching others, right? So they are taking along the line of humility, right? They're saying that the Lord is playing simply a humble role in order to play some sort of education. We can see this consistently, right? This is a very standard thing for the Lord and for the Lord's devotee to do, right? In the case of the Lord's devotee, it's not even a play of humility, right? For the Lord's devotee, there is a very sincere humility that is experienced, even if that position is very high. I'm reminded of one relatively famous pastime I was hearing from Bhakti Charu Maharaj, who was giving a class. And he was speaking about how there was this new bhakt, right? And this new bhakt had been attending, I'm not sure, one of the temples in America. And he'd been attending for a while now, and he'd been really enjoying this, coming into contact with Krishna consciousness, learning that he's not his body, learning all sorts of things like this, right? And as he was going along, he was finding that this chanting of Hare Krishna, it was really helping him to taste some bliss, right? Chant and be happy. So he was experiencing all of this, and all the time he would hear the devotees would tell him, if you're feeling some sort of bad mood, just chant this Maha Mantra, and you'll feel a whole lot better, right? Chant this Hare Krishna, right? And you'll feel a whole lot nicer. And so like this, he was very well established, right? Again, this is one of the forms of preaching, because it's one of the types of people who come to Krishna, right? Those who are in distress, those who are feeling some sort of pangs of the material world. There's a running joke among the devotee youth, especially now, it's assessment time for most of us. So the running joke is the only time we chant extra rounds is during exam time, because that's a time when we're really feeling the desire to do so. So anyways, so this devotee, this new devotee, he was doing this. And so, like this, he was regularly coming and being cultivated. And so one day though, because back in those days, it was the case that Srila Prabhupada, he would visit the temples, right? And so Srila Prabhupada, he was visiting this temple. And as we know, it is the mercy of the spiritual master to chastise, right? Madhavananda Prabhu, he would often say, Gaur Govinda Maharaj once physically pushed him, right? And he said that was his real mercy, right? He said all the times that Gaur Govinda Maharaj had encouraged him and said, good job, you've done a very nice job, right? Those are the times where Gaur Govinda Maharaj had been very much cursing him almost, right? Those have been the times he hadn't been giving him the full mercy. But he said the fullest mercy he ever felt from his spiritual master was when he gave him the most harshest of chastisements. I was there once in Mayapur on Srila Prabhupada's disappearance day, and we were hearing all of the wonderful memories, right? It was, of course, on the disappearance day we hear such beautiful pastimes. And this one disciple of Srila Prabhupada, he would say he was probably one of the worst personal servants Srila Prabhupada had. Everything he would do wrong, and Srila Prabhupada would always call him into the room, and he would chastise him for this and chastise him for that. And he was saying on this advent of the disappearance day, he said every day since that first disappearance day, he said he would give up all of the wealth, all of the time he would have left, just to have Srila Prabhupada once again chastise him, to have Srila Prabhupada once again say, you've done this incorrectly, you've done this inappropriately, right? Because this is when the mercy is most felt. So anyways, like this, Srila Prabhupada, he was pouring out that mercy, and he was chastising everyone, he was feeling very angry, right? That transcendental anger that the devotee experiences. And so very visibly disturbed at the condition that the temple was in, this new bhakt he saw, and he thought, this person, he's very much feeling the pangs of his material condition. And he went up to Srila Prabhupada and he told him, he said, just chant a few rounds and you'll calm down a little bit. And what did Srila Prabhupada do? Srila Prabhupada, he went and he chanted a few rounds, right? So we find here that this humility, in order to be instructive, is a recurring and central theme. We find this throughout the pastimes of the Lord, and we find this throughout several devotees. I remember also my mother, she was saying the first time that she went to Mayapur, she was not even really a devotee, just coming along a little bit curious, right? And so she was going around and she was a little bit lost, right? And being a little bit lost, I'm sure we've all been to Mayapur. It's like it's a city unto itself, right? You get very lost in the campus, right? And so she's seeing this ocean of saffron running around everywhere, and she was very lost, right? And one of her friends told her to go to one building. I'm not sure which building it was, right? And they said, go to this building. We'll all be going together and we're doing a kirtan there, right? So my mother was very lost. So as she was walking through, she thought saffron means they know what's going on here, right? So she said, Hare Krishna, hello, over there. Do you know where this building is, right? She said like that. And so this devotee turned around and said, you turn around this building. It's around that corner. Later, of course, she would realize that was Jayapataka Maharaj. She had stopped and she had said, where's the building, right? And did Jayapataka Maharaj? He didn't. She always says, of course, later on, my mother, she's a disciple of Maharaj, right? Later on, of course, she said, she both wouldn't dream of asking Maharaj for directions, and he probably wouldn't have so nicely given them, right? Then she would have got a higher mercy, right, of the chastisement, right? But she said at the time, right, because there wasn't that sambandha there of the Guru Shishya. So what came out then? Actually, it's described, many senior devotees, I hear them say, it's a real tapasya actually, to take on this role of, I'm giving you some instruction, I'm giving you some sort of discipline, right? It's much more natural because of the humility they've cultivated to just simply go along, right? So there she saw, right, the wonderful qualities of Jayapataka Maharaj. Actually, she was describing another time when she was walking along, right? Because this humility, it comes through a steady practice of Krishna consciousness, right? So she was describing one day then, at this point, she'd become more of an established devotee. And she was chanting her rounds and walking down in Mayapur, right? And she was chanting her rounds and walking. And then behind her, she heard one young brahmachari go, Mataji, Mataji, out of the way, Mataji. Because there was Tamal Krishna Goswami with all of his brahmachari disciples, right? And they were saying, out of the way, Mataji, out of the way, right? Like this. And so my mother, she was getting ready to go out of the way. And then Tamal Krishna Goswami, he said, no. He said, Mataji, please go ahead, right? So here we could see the difference. She said that's where she saw that transition, right? Between the junior attitude and the senior one, right? There you have this idea, get out of the way, right? Here we are coming along, very special. But there was Tamal Krishna Goswami, right? With that very deep, cultivated devotion, right? And there she saw the humility was expressed instead, right? So there we see, right? Humility is very essential, and it's established in order to instruct, right? It's often made the point that actually, when the devotees are going around, they're entitled to all the worship, really, right? Sankarshan Das Adhikari, Maharaj, I was listening to one of his classes, right? And in the class, he was speaking about actually, whenever he travels around, he's eligible to all sorts of worship. Being the spiritual master, he technically, in one sense, he could say, give me the whole world, right? Because he's representing the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But it's only his own discomfort, right, that would prevent him from doing that. So, again, this is, in one sense, it is a sincere humility. It is the Vaishnava expressing that he is feeling himself or herself to be in a very low condition. But on the other hand, it's also, in one sense, the same humility of the Supreme Lord. Because just as much as the Supreme Lord is eligible, is entitled to say, all of this belongs to me, all this worship belongs to me. In the same way, actually, we should always be worshipping the Vaishnavas, right? We should always be giving all that we have to the Vaishnavas, right? But in both cases, right, humility is embodied. And again, this is the mercy of the Vaishnava, right? To manifest this humility. And to manifest this is very important, right? We are hearing in the purport, what are we hearing? That the Supreme Lord is favorable towards all activities performed according to Brahminical culture. And we're hearing all of these different aspects, right? We know this quality of control of the senses and the mind, right? And this is pretty straightforward. My spiritual master, he was saying that in the Mahabharata it's recorded that it is the special dharma of the Kshatriya to face his enemy in battle, right? And to look him into the eyes when either he is killing him or he is being killed by him, right? But it is a special dharma, the special duty of the Brahmana to take bath in the most cold of water and not even flinch, right? So sense control there, we can see, is a very Brahminical quality. Actually, he was saying, once he was going around in India, and of course in India, many saffron-clad people, right? Some of them deserving it, some of them maybe not, right? And so many saffron-clad people, right, going around. And so one person was asking, oh, where are you from? And he said, oh, I'm from the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And he said, and this person, he said, oh, I have one family friend, right? He joined this movement, and now he takes too many baths in the day. He said, we don't even invite him over anymore because the water bill, it goes from here all the way up here, right? He said, so, Guru Maharaj, he was saying, one way that we can understand Krishna consciousness is we're a bathing religion, right? Because we're trying to cultivate this Brahminical culture, right? So, all of these things are here. But one particular one I found interesting in this purport is a mention of practical and theoretical knowledge. Because, of course, this is the point why, of course, again, great devotees, they are embodying their genuine feeling of humility, right? But they embody it in such a way that is very instructive to us. And we need to be instructed. We find there are 5 levels of knowledge described in the Vedic system. The 5 levels of realization. Does anyone know what they are? Yes, this is one of them. These are the 5 sheaths, right, from the Upanishads. There's another system, though, which is also described by Srila Prabhupada. This one is a little less known, but it is in Prabhupada's books. And more in his lectures, actually. He mentions this in a few lectures. It begins with Pratyaksha. Does anyone know the one after Pratyaksha? No, it's Paroksha, right? There's Pratyaksha, and then there's Paroksha. Yes, Mataji knows the next one? Oh, okay. So then after Paroksha, so Pratyaksha we know, it means to see with our senses, right? We're seeing, we're inferring, and we're inferring all sorts of wonderful things. There is no God, we evolved from monkeys, all sorts of wonderful things, right? We can infer from our Pratyaksha, right? So Pratyaksha, this is the beginning one. And on this level, of course, we are seeing, we are experiencing, and on this level we are constructing all sorts of wonderful theories about the world, right? Then higher than that is Paroksha. And Paroksha means to see through the eyes of another. And this is when we begin to understand the nature of the world. We begin to understand it through somebody who actually understands the nature of the world, right? Paroksha, right? Our eyes are now closed, right? This is what happens after Pratyaksha. We see so much and we realize we know nothing, right? So then we close our eyes and think maybe we can learn now, right? Prabhupada, in one of the times where he discusses these levels, he says, he gives a classic example, right? If you're in one country and you want to learn about the other country, you don't just look over the ocean and think, oh, France looks like this, this, and this, right? Because what can you see? Instead, what do? You ring your friend who is in France, right? And then he tells you, oh, it's just another flavor of the material world. Don't come here. Chant Hare Krishna instead, right? So, Paroksha, right? This is seeing through the eyes of the other. And at one point, you hear these things about the nature of the world, you're practicing your Krishna consciousness, you're meditating upon them, right? We know there's Shravanam, and then there's Mananam, right? Before the Nididhyasanam, right? The Nididhyasanam is the realization of what you've heard, right? Once that's realized, then it becomes Aparoksha, right? So it's no longer seeing through the eyes of the other, right? Because at this point, this knowledge has been realized. And at this level, then there's a direct perception, right? You can say your eyes were open, you've closed them, and they've been opened again, right? But this time, when they've been opened with a realization of the nature of the material world. Srila Prabhupada, sometimes he makes this equivalent with self-realization, right? Or some sort of Brahman realization, right? This is knowledge on that sort of level. Impersonalists, well, those favorable impersonalists, right? The impersonalists who will go somewhere, right? They are on this level. This is the level of self-realization. And so, this level is very sweet, right? But does anyone know which level comes after this one? Experience is the last one. Experience is the last one. Then next comes Adhokshaja, right? And of course, we know Adhokshaja is also a name of the Lord. What does it mean? It means he's beyond the senses, beyond the understanding, right? We hear this. So the Supreme Lord beyond the senses is also a name of one of the Vishnu expansions, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada. When he discussed this schema, he says, especially the Adhokshaja platform of understanding is to understand the Vaikuntha planets and to understand the expansions there. And he says, of course, because this is one of the higher levels of knowledge, this is why we see Adhokshaja. If any of us have seen a murti of Adhokshaja, you'll see there are 4 arms, right? And he said all those 4 arms are there purely for wiping away our anarthas before reaching the higher platform, right? So Adhokshaja, in general, Srila Prabhupada, in one room conversation, I think, he says that Adhokshaja knowledge is transcendental knowledge. But the next level, which is Prakrita knowledge, sometimes called Prakrita Pratyaksha, just to throw everyone off, right? This level is spiritual knowledge. And this is knowledge about Krishna in Goloka. This is direct perception, right? In Adhokshaja, we are understanding about the nature of that world, right? That world. Is there a sun and a moon in that transcendental abode? Is there? In the Vaikuntha planets? There's no need for one, right? Krishna, he says. Krishna, he's so effulgent, right? Exactly. But then, that's Adhokshaja. But then in the Prakrita understanding, we understand that there is a moon, right? Because in Goloka, there is a moon, right? But why is there a moon? There's a moon because what else would Krishna dance under, right? There's no need for that effulgence, but there's something higher. So this Prakrita, this is a higher level. Srila Prabhupada, he says this Prakrita level of understanding only comes when one is practicing on those higher levels of Raganuga Bhakti and all those sort of nectar of devotion topics, right? So this is a very direct perception, right? And of course, this is the wonderful cycle. I always think Krishna consciousness is composed of cycles, right? In the beginning, the Kanishtadhikari, right? He is unable to discriminate who is a good devotee, who is a higher devotee, who is a low devotee, who is a devotee, who is a non-devotee, right? He has complete inability to discriminate. Then we have the Madhyamadhikari, right? And what happens with the Madhyamadhikari? The Madhyamadhikari, he is able to tell this person is a devotee, this person is not a devotee, right? And what happens with the Uttamadhikari? Oh, everyone's a devotee. Again, he's lost the ability to discriminate, right? Krishna consciousness has this cycle, right? You go to the average person on the street, you tell them, is Krishna God? They'll say no, right? Then we see the practicing devotee, right? He practices very sternly. And if you ask him, is Krishna God? He will say, yes, Krishna is God. But then if you go to Mother Jashoda and you say, is Krishna God? She'll say, Krishna is a rascal, right? That's what she will say, right? These are the cycles of Krishna consciousness. In the same way, we have pratyaksha, right? Eyes open, right? Seeing this world and thinking, again, all sorts of nonsense. That's what I'm thinking. Especially during my assessment time, I love this part of Krishna consciousness. So I can look at all my exams and think, oh, mental speculation, this is all nonsense, right? I get in that mindset, so it helps me relieve some of my frustration. Actually, I was speaking to my roommate Murari Priya Prabhu, and I was saying, once these exams are over, oh, I'm just happy I can freely go along, I can do my sadhana, I can do all of these things. And Prabhu, he said, once these exams are over, my professors are going to get the worst chastisement they've ever got ever. So I thought both moods are appropriate. So, anyways, these are the cycles, right? We're beginning with this direct perception. And then we learn, what are these senses for, right? They're here for speculation and for nonsense, right? These senses, I've had senses for how many anadi, time immemorial births, and what have they done for me? Now maybe I should have some humility and listen, right? And then we hear, eyes closed. But then again, as the cycle goes on, that circle of Krishna consciousness, then one opens their eyes, right? And what do they see? No longer do they see this world of filth and dirt, right? Instead they see something else, right? They see Krishna, something much higher. Again, this is the circles of Krishna consciousness. So we hear like this, these are the levels of understanding, these are levels of knowledge, right? And as is said here, knowledge practical and theoretical. Ultimately, when one reaches a fullness of Krishna consciousness, all theoretical knowledge becomes practical, right? All of these things become very, very high. I remember hearing a story, an early book distribution story from His Holiness Tripurari Maharaj. He was going out on book distribution, right? And we know Srila Prabhupada was very fond of instructing directly. If you read in the Veda-based Tripurari Maharaj, he would say, it is one thing you're distributing these books so wonderfully. Tripurari Maharaj, as we know, Prabhupada elsewhere said, he is a book distribution personified, right? He is the incarnation of book distribution, right? But Srila Prabhupada said, it is one thing to distribute the books, but you must study them also, right? So Tripurari Maharaj, he would study the books often. I heard one other devotee was saying in some memories, right, of the early book distribution. What he would do, every time he would read Srila Prabhupada's books, he would go through the purport. And whenever in the purport there would be some other book cited, he would take out that other book, he would read that text, and he would read that purport as well. And in that way, he would feel that connection of how all of Srila Prabhupada's books were connected, right? Going through Srimad Bhagavatam, if Bhagavad Gita was quoted, he would open up his Gita, he would read that text and the purport, see how it all connects back, right? So a very intense routine of study. So he was on the street. He was doing book distribution, right? And so he was doing book distribution. He ran into this person. This person said, "Oh, the Bhagavad Gita. I know the Bhagavad Gita." If any of us have been on book distribution, you'll know, you hear this often, right? And what they know about Bhagavad Gita is neither here nor there, right? If they're lucky, they know it was spoken by Krishna, right? So he says, "I know the Bhagavad Gita." And he said, "Oh, really?" He said, "Yes, I am a Janani yogi." And so Tripurari Maharaj was thinking, "Oh, what is this? A new form of elevated yoga? I've never heard of this." He said, "I am a Janana yogi." And then he was saying, "Oh, how do you spell that?" And then he said, "Oh, Jnana." And he was saying, "Oh, Jnana yoga." But he thought, okay. And then he said, "So what does," Tripurari Maharaj said, "So what is this Janana yoga that you're doing?" And so this person, he was going back and forth and he was saying, meditating, I'm focusing, I'm away, opening my third eye, all those sort of things, right? And so he was saying all of these things, right? And so Tripurari Maharaj, he thought, I'll engage him, I'll preach some sort of things. And so he was preaching, standard stuff, yoga ladder, like this, right? To explain to him, right? This person was very impressed. He took a Gita at least, right? And at the end, he said, you told me you're a bhakti yogi, right? But you have a lot of jnana for a bhakta. So here we can see, right? Actually, this person's insight was very appropriate, right? Because we find, right, the bhakta, the devotee, all of this jnana, it is fulfilled. All of it is realized. All this theoretical knowledge that is there is directly perceived, directly realized for the devotee. Again, we heard adhokshaja, beyond the senses, right? And we hear this in Ishopanishad. We know that the Supreme Lord, he is described as what? He is described as faster than anyone, right? Faster than the demigods, right? He is not moving, and yet he is faster than even them, right? And Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in his purport, he describes that when this is said, this is meant in two ways. One, quite literally, the Supreme Lord, he is beyond the speed of the demigods, right? This is why we know the demigods, when they had to go to pray for Krishna to Advent, where do they go? They go to that great ocean, right? And they pray because they cannot directly approach the Lord, right? They only go up to the shore. They're not able to fully reach him, right? They only go up to the shore and then they pray from there, right? But another meaning that's given by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur is that we know all of our senses have a demigod presiding over them, right? We have a demigod presiding over the eyes and like this, right? And so the meaning that he pulls out as well is that the Lord cannot be directly perceived, right? Because he is faster than the demigods presiding over all of our senses, right? And we can know this is the experience. Sometimes people, they'll often say, right? They'll say, I'll believe in God when I see God, right? This is their wonderful refutation, right? They'll say, I'll believe in God when I can see God, right? But if you were to tell that same person, oh, well then why don't you go and go talk again now? I have to change every election I have to change the name, right? It's Anthony Albanese now. So if you were to tell them, okay, well, tomorrow we will have, Prabhu, what's your name? Akash Prabhu, right? If we say tomorrow, Akash Prabhu, he will go and he will knock on the door of Parliament House, right? And he will say, I need to talk to Anthony Albanese. I need to give him a bit of insight. I'm going to tell him to stop slaughtering the cows, right? I'm going to tell him all of these things, right? Do you think, will you get in, Prabhu? Maybe by Krishna's mercy you will, but with Krishna's mercy is the emphasis there, right? So, right, people, they understand this, right? You have to be some other leader of the world, right? Elevated personality. Some sort of other elevated personality in order to speak to the Prime Minister, right? So they understand this, right? They will understand that it's absurdity. You're a madman if you try to knock on the door. And yet, they think the Supreme Personality of Godhead, so simply, right? He'll just come over, He'll just appear before me, right? There's some adhikar needed, right? So like this, this is our general experience. That the Lord is beyond the senses, again, because he is faster than all the demigods. So how can the demigods catch up to him? But what do we hear? What do we hear in Krishna book, in Srimad Bhagavatam? Krishna, he is running. He is running with so much fear, right? It's described, what do we hear in Damodarashtakam? Krishna's eyes, they're filled with tears. Sanatana Goswami, he gives two descriptions, actually. The initial description he gives is that Krishna's eyes, they're filled with tears. Why? Because he's thinking, my mother, she is my mother, right? If I rub my eyes, because that's the description that's given, he's rubbing his eyes with the tears coming out. And he's thinking, if I rub my eyes hard enough, tears will come out, and her maternal heart, it'll be so softened, right? And she'll stop chasing after me, I won't be in trouble. This is the first description that's given by Sanatana Goswami. But then Krishna, something happens, because he rubs his eyes and the tears come out and his mother still keeps chasing him. And then the real tears come out because he's thinking, oh no, that's the best trick I have in the book and even that one's not working. Now I'm really in trouble, right? So then he's rubbing his eyes because he's thinking the tears are getting in the way. I can't see how to run away to escape. I need to get these tears out of the way, right? And then what happens? Does Krishna run away? Does that Krishna who is faster than all of the senses, right? Is he able to run away? No. Caught from behind. I often like to make this point. I've made it in too many classes. You're probably all bored of hearing it. But it's described that Mother Jashoda in Damodarashtakam, she captures Krishna from behind. What does that mean if you've caught someone from behind? It means up until the last second they're trying to run away, right? Up until the last second they're trying to run away. So it's not that Krishna is thinking, oh wow, there's my devotee. I'll mercifully slow down a bit. What is Krishna thinking? He's thinking, oh my God, I'm really in trouble now, right? That's what Krishna is thinking. And he's running as fast as he can, but he cannot outrun Mother Jashoda, right? So that is the difference between the Adhokshaja and Prakrita platforms. In the Adhokshaja level, the Lord is beyond the senses. But on the Prakrita level, the devotees are able to capture that Lord who can outrun all of the senses. So, this is the nature of knowledge on Krishna consciousness platform. It is not that we are not cultivating knowledge, right? It is not that we are avoiding knowledge. In fact, the highest knowledge is there, right? I remember, I'm sure we all remember, 50th anniversary of Sri Sri Radha Gopinath, right? And there was the Pushpa Abhishek, right? And we all remember afterwards, all of the flowers were put out, and we all had the wonderful sort of, like a snow fight, right? But with the with the flower petals. And I was walking with Nrsimha Kavacha Prabhu afterwards, right? Now speaking of Nrsimha Kavacha Prabhu, and I was telling him, I was saying, I'm really thinking, I'm really feeling fortunate to be connected to Bhakti Yoga, right? Because somewhere, somewhen, there's some yogi, right? In the Himalayas, and with all due, I offer my full respects unto him. I don't mean any disrespect, but he's probably standing on his hand for maybe 200 years now, right? His nails are growing long, and yet he's probably having, in terms of his lifetime, the amount of spiritual advancement he's having, it's not as much as maybe one of the devotees there who was throwing those flower petals at each other. Nrsimha Kavacha Prabhu said that's not correct, and I thought, again, I'm getting too much mercy on this visit. So I was thinking, okay, well, which mistake have I made now? But then he said, this yogi, meditating his whole life, doing the most complex austerities, it is not the case that he won't have the advancement, right? The advancement that one devotee has by throwing that. He won't even be able to understand the level of advancement that the devotee has simply by throwing that. It is not even within his purview. It is not even on his map, right? Forget about having any chance of attaining it. He won't even be able to know of its possibility. So again, right? It is not. Srila Prabhupada, he makes this point often, right? We read in Bhagavad Gita, right? They will say, oh, you do bhakti yoga. I mean, it's easy. It's for lesser people, right? What's his name? Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, right? I think he was the first president of India or something, right? He wrote a translation of the Upanishads, and he very famously wrote, in Vedanta philosophy, bhakti is the lower level. And when one has done enough bhakti, then they can come to the jnana platform or the jnana platform. At this point, I'm not sure which pronunciation I like more. He said this, right? But Srila Prabhupada, he writes in his purport, if bhakti is so easy, then why aren't all the jnanis doing it? If bhakti is such a simple process, why don't they come to this process, right? If this is the easy way out, right? And it's all the same, whichever path you take, it's all the same, then why don't they all come to this devotional process? This is the inconsistency, right, of this offensive style of impersonalism. I won't touch upon it because I'm sure we've touched upon it a lot during this chapter, but there's the offensive style of impersonalism and there's the unoffensive style. The four Kumaras were the unoffensive style, right? But this is a very offensive style. So, all that to say, when we are practicing bhakti, just because we are not practicing jnana yoga does not mean we are not having jnana, we are not having knowledge. In fact, this is the grand irony, the devotee, by his practice of bhakti yoga, ends up having more jnana than the jnana yogi in his practice of jnana yoga. This is one of those great ironies, right? So, knowledge, very, very essential. And again, not just theoretical knowledge, but a practical knowledge that is grasped, that is realized, right? And so, what is this practical knowledge realized? Oh, before I say that, I wanted to touch on faith in Scripture quickly. Because faith is something that I find interesting. It's something I've been reflecting upon in my personal study for a bit now, because it's a very precarious thing, especially if you engage with youth. You know, they'll say, how do I know if this is true? How do I know if that is true, right? Faith is a very, very complex topic. And one interesting point I found is when our acharyas tend to discuss, and also Srila Prabhupada, when he renders the English translations of the Bhagavad Gita, what's interesting is when we come with this word faith, we think of a list of beliefs, right? I have faith in Krishna consciousness, so I think this, and this, right? I believe that Krishna is God. I believe that this happened, that this happened, that this happened, right? This is how we tend to think of faith, right? If you have faith that God exists, you have a list of beliefs and you're ticking them off, right? But our acharyas and Srila Prabhupada, interestingly enough, they have a much stronger understanding of faith, right? In fact, the word shraddha, etymologically, it means to place one's heart into, right? This is one of the ways we can etymologically take our rendition, if you will, right? Of shraddha, right? So it means to place faith into. And so when we find in the Bhagavad Gita, right, we know many times Krishna, he says, the faithless, they do not understand this. Our acharyas, they don't render it as saying those who do not believe in God, right? Well, they actually render a few different levels. We won't have time to get through all of them. But they revolve essentially around doubting one's practice of Krishna consciousness. If one is not confident that by practicing this Krishna consciousness that they will receive the result that is glorified, then they do not have faith. This is the crux of faith. Again, in the Western world, knowledge is very theoretical, right? My professors, and I to some degree, I really do respect them. But what do? They tell us, right? Okay, after this lecture, we're all going out for beers and we're all going to get drunk, right? I remember hearing one of the most senior professors in the department. She was going out once with some students to celebrate, and I heard that apparently 2 hours in, she was vomiting so much alcohol she was drinking, right? She had to go to the bathroom. She was vomiting. She came back out and she kept on drinking, right? So, this is an example of we have some sort of theoretical knowledge, but practical knowledge, is it there? Not so much, right? So this is not there, but in the Western system, right? Because she would be considered, in this system that we are in, she would be considered one of the most knowledgeable people in Australia, if not the world, right? So there's a big emphasis on having some sort of theoretical understanding. But there is a practical understanding as well, right? So in our understandings of faith, we'll think faith in Scripture means, right, that I believe all of these things. But that is not sufficient. Faith in Scripture means that I've heard the glories of Bhakti Yoga, I believe in it, and I'm performing it. This is what faith means. And that's why, actually, when Chakravarti Thakur, he describes the different types, because, Krishna, he lists, he gives different sort of descriptions, the ignorant, the faithless, like this, right? All of them revolve around a lack of faith and devotion from the Shastras, right? Another example is the fully ignorant, right? He or she has never read Bhagavad Gita, right? Never read Bhagavad Gita, never heard of anything. He is considered the most fortunate, right? Somehow he has some ignorance. Then there's also the other type. This is the one who's read too much. He is full of jnana, right? He's full of it, right? He's read the Rig Veda, he's read the Yajur Veda, he's read all of the Puranas, he's read the Ramayana, he's read every single Mahabharat recension that exists. And because what is the result of all of this reading? He can quote to you very esoteric Upanishads that only him and 2 other people have read. And what is the result of this? He doesn't know what process to take to. He doesn't know what to do, right? Overwhelmed and overburdened by his knowledge. One is burdened by his lack of knowledge, and that is all right. He is in the most fortunate position because that's an easy problem to solve, right? And the other one is in the most unfortunate position because to be overburdened by knowledge is a very, very difficult thing to undo, right? And then, of course, the last one is the one who has studied all these things. He knows that bhakti is supreme. He knows that bhakti is the highest process. And yet, he doesn't have faith that this process will be fulfilled. So this is what faith in the scripture means. Again, faith in the scriptures is not it's not a list of propositions about the world. I reject Indology, I reject evolution. We might think this is faith. Right? And of course, it's a byproduct of faith. But the essence of faith is that, yes, by throwing these flower petals, right, there is a promise that there will be so much progress that I can make in my spiritual life, that by following in the footsteps of the great devotees, I will be able to attain eventually, somehow, somewhen. But with faith, somehow it is possible that this process will come to fruition, which is why we hear the 10 offenses to the holy name, right? There's that one. To think the glories of the holy name to be exaggerations. Why is that offensive? Because it is a result of a lack of faith in the scripture, right? So like this, we see it. And therefore, knowledge is so central to our practice of Krishna consciousness. Again, this is why Srila Prabhupada, he was so insistent, right, on book distribution. Actually, just recently, I heard, what's his name, Mahotsava Prabhu? Mahotsava Prabhu, he just broke the world record, 2002 books distributed in a day, right? So, Jai, right? I was seeing like all of this glorification. So it was on my mind, right? Very nectarian. This was, and his spiritual master, right? Of course, we see the mood of the guru is reflected in the disciple, right? And so his spiritual master is His Holiness Bhakti Vikash Maharaj, right? And I was hearing a class by not a class, it was a YouTube video by Bhakti Vikash Maharaj, right? And he was asked to give some sort of encouragement to book distributors, right? Bhakti Vikash Maharaj. So he began speaking. He said, I've been requested to give some words of encouragement to book distributors. And he said, but I cannot, because they are the ones giving me encouragement. And so he gave some glorification of book distribution. And at the end, he was explaining, of course, all of these points about the necessity of it, right? How important it is, because again, the spreading of knowledge, right? It is so essential, actually. It is a key part of bhakti. And the growing in our own knowledge is a key part of bhakti. Again, prakrita, right? You'll see people, they'll speak a lot about Raganuga bhakti and all sorts of things, right? Indra Prabhu is it Indra Prabhu? I think it's Indra Prabhu. He'll say, you're thinking about which body you have, but you still think you're this body, right? But we're thinking about all these things very elevated. But how does Srila Prabhupada fit it into the system? It is a level of knowledge, right? So knowledge is so essential. So Bhakti Vikash Maharaj, he was explaining all of these things. And the distribution of this knowledge is so essential, right? And so speaking this at the end, he said, actually, all that I can request, all that I can say is I've been made very happy by this request for 2 reasons. One is I'm very happy to see people inspired in the distribution of books. But the second point he made is he said, I'm also very happy to think that somewhere a book distributor is keeping me in his mind while performing this activity. Because by that I'm blessed, right? That is the greatest benediction that I can receive. That somebody is doing something so pleasing to Srila Prabhupada and he's keeping someone like me in his mind. That means I will be receiving some great blessings. Again, I was making the point, the humility, right, of the great devotees, but also a point emphasizing how important the spreading of knowledge is. I was reading once an old Vyas Puja book from 1990 something or another. I was only reading it because I was going through Vedabase. It was a classic question, can we eat mushrooms or not? And so I was going through the Vedabase and I was looking through mushroom. And so, I was going through and then I fell upon this one Vyas Puja offering. It was so nectarian, so I was just reading all of the other ones, right? And I was reading one from, I forgot where, one of the countries in the Chinese area, right? So I think either Taiwan, Hong Kong, might even have been China, right? It was a Vyas Puja offering from the whole yatra, right? And in the yatra, they were saying, Srila Prabhupada, in our language, right? It is very hard for us to write Krishna. Krishna is a very, very hard word to write. In fact, we don't have the letters to fully write it, right? So we are feeling very unfortunate, right? We are feeling we are in a very unfortunate position. This is the level of our language that we cannot even write the name of Krishna. We have to come up with all sorts of special ways to explain to people how to say Krishna, Krishna, like this. But what we do have in our language is we have the letters to write Prabhupada, right? We do have those things. And so we feel, even though we feel in one sense cursed that our language is not able to write Krishna, we feel blessed that our language is a constant reminder, right? Our language is a constant reminder that even though Krishna is so far away, Srila Prabhupada is always there, accessible to us, right? In the form of your books, you have made what is so inaccessible to us so accessible, right? We are struggling to say Krishna, but we are very competent to say Prabhupada, right? So, what is the point there, right? This is the value, right, of not only of the books, but also what they can give, right? Because again, coming to that point I was making about Srila Tripurari Maharaj, right? Srila Prabhupada said that, right? Not just to distribute, but to study, right? The studying of Srila Prabhupada's books, right, is so essential. Because in this way, one can understand this knowledge. Again, we must see through the eyes of another, because we are not seeing these things, right? Prabhupada once, in an interview, he was saying, I see Krishna, right? And the devotee, I think he was explaining, sometimes you'll hear that Srila Prabhupada's disciples, they start engaging in the interviews and all. And he said, it means he sees everything is connected to Krishna. And Srila Prabhupada said, no, I am seeing Krishna. So, like this, right? This is the nature, right? Because are we able to see Krishna? No. He's on this level, right? Beyond the Dhokshaja, right? We are unable to see. But through Srila Prabhupada's books, right? Krishna is made so accessible. So again, jnana. Jnana is very, very essential. Knowledge is very essential. And therefore, we have some value for Brahminical culture. Because Brahminical culture is very, very conducive to the growth and knowledge and all of these other things. Do I have time? No. I'll make one final point and then I'll wrap up, right? And so we find this, right? We find this in the pastimes of Mahaprabhu, right? Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, so famously, he's consistently denying, right? For many esoteric reasons, right? He's consistently denying that he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, right? We're finding here, in one sense, a strong level of setting the example, right? Mahaprabhu, he very nicely sets the example. It's sometimes said, Krishna is able to break all the rules because Mahaprabhu followed them all, right? Sometimes some devotees, I've heard this said, right? No one can say that Krishna is actually out of some, all the people who try to take the Pratyaksha platform to understand Krishna, right? They'll speculate all sorts of nonsense and they'll say all sorts of blasphemous things about him. But actually they can't say it because Krishna is not some regular individual, not in control of his senses. And how do we know this? Because Krishna is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And what austerity Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was engaged in, right? So Mahaprabhu, we know, he would very much reject, at the time they would say Narayan, Narayan, right? When they would see a sannyasi. Why? Because they would think, a sannyasi is none other than, well, he's realized that he actually is the Supreme Lord, right? And Mahaprabhu, he would reject this, which again, I find very amusing. Because of all the sannyasis in India at the time, the only one who didn't accept that he was the Supreme Personality of Godhead was the one who was the Supreme Personality of Godhead. All the other ones are very happily accepting this, even though they weren't, right? So again, it's a grand irony to this, right? So like this, Mahaprabhu, he would consistently be denying this, right? We know in the Gundicha Marjan pastimes, right? Just in the build-up, Ramananda Roy, it was Ramananda Roy, right, who was badgering Mahaprabhu. Please give your darshan, right? Please give your darshan to the king, right? Mahaprabhu is rejecting this. And then, of course, Ramananda Roy, what does he say? He says, but you are the Supreme Lord, you are independent. You are dependent on no one, right? And what does Mahaprabhu say? He says, Ami manusho ashramesho nashi, right? I'm just a human, I'm just a sannyasi, nothing else, right? And if I were to associate with the king, it would be a great blemish, right, on me. Just the same as a white cloth is fully ruined with even a single black dot, right? So like this, we find Mahaprabhu, right? He is fully embodying this mood of showing the humble example, right? And then, so what do we see? What do we see in this pastime? In this pastime, cutting it short, I was going to go through the whole thing, but and time is not. But in this pastime, there's one very significant point. And this point is, when at one point, right, we know Mahaprabhu, he is setting this example. And so when they are washing, all of this water, it is washing on his feet, right? And so they are trying to drink it, the devotees. And Mahaprabhu, he is saying, this is inappropriate, right? I'm simply a sadhu, right? You cannot do this. And so he very angrily chastises the devotee, right? And he tells, Srup Damodar, right? He tells him, take your Gorya, and take him out. Throw him out, right? Like this he says. And Prabhupada, he makes a very specific point. Because what does Mahaprabhu say? He doesn't say, take my Gorya. He doesn't say, take my Gorya Vaishnav. He doesn't say, take the Gauriya Vaishnav. He says, take your Gauriya Vaishnav and throw him away, right? And Prabhupada, he makes a point, right? How are we connected to Mahaprabhu? How many texts did Mahaprabhu leave behind? He left the Shikshashtakam. There's one or two other Sanskrit texts that maybe could be attributed to Mahaprabhu, right? What is this? Maybe 10 shlokas, right? But how much literature have the Goswamis given us? How much literature has Srila Prabhupada given us, right? In this way, how are we connected to Mahaprabhu? We are connected to Mahaprabhu. We are connected, therefore, to Krishna, right? We are connected through his devotees, through the knowledge that they are giving, right? And therefore, that point is made. Your Gauriya. We are the property of the devotees. And because we are the property of the devotees, we can hear something about Krishna. But only when we make ourselves the property of the devotees, when we are very eager to be considered merely the property of the Vaishnavas, then we will receive this knowledge, right? So this is the principle that's given. What can we understand about Krishna? Not much. Or at least I can't understand much. I only understand because I'm hearing from all of the wonderful Vaishnavas here, right? This is the principle, right? So then, all that to say, Brahminical culture, very, very much centered around knowledge, right? But how is knowledge most received? It is received through devotional service. Through this bhakti process, the highest knowledge is given. Knowledge which no other process can dream of. And how is this knowledge received? Through the mercy of the Vaishnavas. Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda ki.